Now, don't pretend like you're not sitting over here dancing along here on this Music Monday. I'm, of course, Crystal Frost, and joining me in studio is Greg Vadnais. And Greg, when I came across your music, I was not prepared to for what I was getting. When you were describing yourself and when you look at your bio and you look at all the things that you're doing out there in the world of music, especially based out of Boyne City, you are like... There's no word for this, what you're doing. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
What is it? What is the word that you would use for Botala, which is your main project as a musician?
Eclectic.
Eclectic.
I think.
I would definitely use the word eclectic as well.
I end up in a lot of circles of people using that word, so I think that's the word for it.
Well, it started out, I mean, you started out your journey just like most people start out their journey. Somebody said, hey, you should get into music lessons, right?
Yeah, my folks put me in guitar when I was young. My sister played piano, and I played guitar, and then my dad had a drum set, and he set it up when I was a kid. And, I mean, it really is. It's funny that it ends up being that story. Grew up playing drum set to records in the basement.
Wow.
And then at a certain point when I was a kid, you know, you become, you join a band based on music instrument ownership. And so I became a drummer in a band. And then I stopped taking classical guitar lessons when I was 11 or 12 because I had the choice of either playing hockey or guitar.
Oh, isn't it terrible when you have to make that choice?
And, you know.
So, you know, your dad had a drum set, but your parents put you into guitar. Do you think that there was something behind that? Like, hey, we don't need another drummer in the house.
I don't, you know, they didn't even have the drum set set up. I think the drum set just was in the basement.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, and I was too little to reach the pedals when I started taking guitar. And it was classical guitar lessons at Marshall Music in Lansing, in East Lansing, and with Roger Humphreys, who I think is still around. And I liked it. I really enjoyed it. I wish I would have played piano now, you know, in retrospect. And I did take piano. But I think when I was a kid, you know, my folks encouraged me to, you know, play music and whatever I wanted to play, and so we had instruments around the house.
So music was just one of your passions. I mean, obviously, when you look at a kid, if you can take a snapshot of, you know, maybe going back in your childhood and take a snapshot, I mean, there's going to be a ton of things that you're interested in. Clearly,
Star Wars,
hockey, and Star Wars, and music, and yet you were always interested in history and geography too.
Yes.
And so how did that, I mean, when you really look at what you're doing and you're marrying percussion with your love of history, your love of geography, and you end up doing some African diaspora stuff, you're studying West African drumming, did you realize that was the path that you were headed on when you picked up those drumsticks for the first time in your parents' basement?
No, I think that my interest in history and geography came from, we had really great schools. I went to St. Thomas Aquinas when I was a kid. I always liked school. I had great teachers. I went to Hannah Middle School and then East Lansing High School. And I just, now looking back, I always really liked school. And I had an affinity for history and English and anthropology and that kind of stuff. And I think when I was in my late teens, I was still playing drums and getting into jazz, but I started hearing, it was actually North Indian classical music, and specifically the tabla, that drew me towards world music in that direction. And I moved to Boston for a year and worked at Tower Records on Newberry Street.
Oh, wow.
On the third floor, which was the classical and world music and jazz floor. And there were some really interesting people from all over the world that were there studying at the conservatories, and a couple of them were studying North Indian classical music. And so I started talking to them about it. And this was, I don't want to say pre-internet, but I certainly wasn't online. There was no YouTube. There was no way to get this stuff other than
at Tower Records on the
Tower
third
Records.
floor.
Yeah. So I think that opened me up to the fact that it was an accessible thing that you could study and you could learn. And then I moved out to Colorado, and that's really where all of these various interests kind of cohesed into one thing. And I had some good exposure to teachers and friends and encouragement in that direction.
Now, when you are mixing, though, this is the thing that I hear from your music from Botala. You have this deep-rooted sense of history in the music. You can feel yourself, sort of exploring that culture, but you're doing it in such a dance music kind of way. I mean, this is something that I really see here, is that you're marrying this ancient world with this sort of EDM dance music world, and that's not something that just happened by accident, I'm sure.
No, it was probably about 2 years ago now that I decided I was going to finally just do my own solo project, and it really came out of the fact that I had a large community of people that were steeped in this music out west that I just haven't found up here. There are, Mark Alderman's a great resource for that. There are, and Rod Russell, and there are some people up here that have had exposure and been to other places, but there's not really like the time or the ability to get together to start a band. So I said, well, I've done some percussion with DJs, and I kind of was like, well, what are they doing? And I'm looking, and it's not impossible to figure the technology out. I've always played around at home with that stuff, so I was comfortable with it, and I thought, okay, how can I bring, the modern sound and marry it with my percussive stuff that I really like doing, and some of the melodic things as well, and then I started poking around and finding this music. I was like, it's out there. Yeah. It's the sound that a lot of people really love, and there's great people all over the world doing it. And I just thought I could bring that here
in northern Michigan.
Yeah.
You mentioned a couple of things: growing up in East Lansing, and then going over to Boston, and then going to Colorado. How did you end up in Boyne City, Michigan?
In 2007, I had my first son in Colorado, Mason. He was born out there, and my wife and I had, I was always close to my family, and at the time, in 2007, my folks were living in Gaylord, and so I wanted to have my son kind of have some of the experience I had around family and that. And I think, I was 27 when I had him, so there's a bit of that, there's sort of that sense, and I see it happen generationally. People, you come back to the nest, you need the support system and that sort of thing. And Durango, where we were living, is very hard to get to. It's a trip. So, it was a challenging decision, and we didn't really know what kind of length of time we were planning on being here. But, we found Boyne City at the time it was a cute town. It was similar to kind of where we were living. It's a small tourist town that's seasonally accessible to all the different things that people like to do outdoors. And I said, let's just stay for a little bit. And it's been 10 years now.
10 years now.
Yeah.
And you do a lot with the music scene. Botala is your main project, your solo project, but you also have a blues band and a jazz quartet.
Yes. The John Archambault band I've been with for probably close. I've played with John. He was one of the first people I played with up here. And John was the old lead guitar player for Mojo and the Boogeymen. Yeah. And Matt Marsh is our bass player, great singer and bass player, and he's here out of Williamsburg. And then the quartet, I have loved jazz, and I call myself a jazz drummer, although, I don't know, you give yourself, it's hard to put labels on it, but I really do love jazz, and I've wanted to play, and there are great jazz musicians up here, and I found if you want to do anything at all, you just have to make it happen. So I knew some of the guys, and I just was like, well, I'll just book gigs. I'm almost 40 now, and I'm getting out of that youthful sense of like, oh, I'm not good enough, or no one's calling me, and no one's waiting around to call you. So you just have to go and make it happen. So that's kind of what I've been doing the last couple of years, is creating Botala and finding a place for that wherever that happens, and then finding some spots for the jazz quartet and really getting to play a lot with those guys. It's been great.
Now, you also run a summer concert series. It's the Sojourn Summer Concert Series at Sojourn Lakeside Resort in Gaylord.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little about that?
So Sojourn Lakeside Resort was, actually, they just did an article about it in Northern Express last year. my boss in Gaylord, he and his wife owned that property for a long time and decided to rehab it, and they really they put a lot of love into it. They are awesome people, and they wanted to create a space that people could come and kind of get away from, you know, modern life and slow things down. And it's a beautiful spot. It's right on the shore of Lake Dixon, which is about 5 minutes from downtown Gaylord.
Yeah,
it's beautiful. And they asked me to help. They'd sponsored, I think it was, I'm blanking on who it was now, but they had put money in for a house concert to help produce an album for a band, and they were having them come and do the show, and they didn't know how to, like, what they needed.
Yeah.
Like, well, you know, what do we need? I was like, well, do you have a stage? Do you have lights? Are they bringing their own PA? And they were kind of like, oh, I don't know.
What's a PA?
Yeah. So I helped them put that show together, and that went so well that they were like, well, what if we did some shows out there? And I said, well, you could do a concert series. And so we put our heads together about what that might look like. And having done a lot of these things as a performer, I kind of know what works and what doesn't, especially when you're starting out. And it's great to have tons and tons of ideas, but sometimes trying to do everything makes it come out, you know, not the way that you'd want it. So I said, let's just do it simple. We'll do one show a month for 4 months in the middle of the week, so we're not competing with everything else that's going on in summertime on the weekends. And so we just do a 90-minute show at an opening act. We'd get, you know, 100, 150, 175 people come out on a Wednesday night from, I think, what did we do, like 7 to 9, something like that. And and it was beautiful. People come, bring your own wine or beer, bring snacks. We had a food cart from Gaylord there too. And then people watch the show, watch the sunset, and go home before it gets dark
fantastic.
out. It was awesome. It really went well. And so we're looking forward to next season. We're having a meeting on that this month about the bands that we're going to bring in.
When you moved here from Colorado and you had your first son, did you find it difficult to sort of dip your toe into the northern Michigan music scene? And I'm thinking about 10 years ago, and I grew up here, so I understand 10 years ago was a different place than it is now for musicians, especially Grand Traverse County and some of the surrounding counties have really grown up, and you have more and more competition. Did you feel like it was easy to sort of find your way and introduce yourself to current musicians? I'm
not shy, you know, and at that point, I moved here when I was 27, and I'd played a lot. You know, I'd been out of the country with a band, and I'd gotten a taste of being an independent sort of sideman. So I was not shy about trying to find people, but figuring it out was difficult because, again, you know, what was the scene in Boyne City? There was a place that had shows, but there's really no venues there. Right. So I had to go and learn that, you know, you got to drive a half an hour in any direction to find a place to play. And then meeting people, you know, I was still very much in my late 20s mode of being a night owl. So and people are nice. I mean, and I will say this for Michigan, and I've said it before, everywhere I go, and I do get around the state quite a bit, I think the musicians that are really trying to create a scene and their own music are open to people. I never get a sense of of threatening anybody's territory.
Oh, that's great.
At least I don't, or if I'm supposed to, I don't really care. and again, getting into my late 30s and early 40s, you know, I'm looking back now, and I want to be to the younger generation what my teachers and my, you know, the folks that kind of shepherded me through this were. So if I see young people or looking for places to play or trying to figure out how to get a gig or what should they do, I mean, I'm 100, you know, I'll give people the names of anybody I hear that books anything, and you know, I don't consider that that's not a threat or anything. I want people to figure out how to be musicians, and then I also want the venues and bookers to understand how to interact with us, because I think that's a gap that needs to be, I don't know, massaged a little bit. The communication factor there is a little bit wanting, but I think you're going to get that from anybody. It's, you know, I'm sure that's a tough job, but I only see it from one side.
Your son, you said you had your first son 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you have other children?
Yeah, I had my second son, Eli, was born 2 years later in 2009, and he was born in Charlevoix.
Okay.
My wife, Christy, she's from San Antonio, Texas. We met in Durango. And so, you know, and that was the other thing about moving up here, not so much as a musician, but just as a person that had, you know, you establish your, who you think you are in those times. And, you know, we had a kid, moved across the country and to a place that we didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
I'm not from up here, you know, and people kind of let you know that right off the bat. I got a lot of questions like, well, who's your family? And I got the sense, I kind of made this joke of like, okay, I get it. I don't have a road named after me up here. So,
right.
And that's really what people are they're trying to find out how they know you.
Yeah.
And I get that. And it's endearing. And as much as I travel the state, I mean, you get that everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's fine. And it doesn't bother me. And I've, it's more about building relationships to me than trying to compete and make a space for that.
So your boys are tweens now then. They're what, 10 and 12?
11 and 9.
11 and 9.
Yeah.
Are they into music? Are you kind of doing the same thing that your parents did?
You can't take a step in my house without running into an instrument. So I didn't force them to do any. I'm forcing them to play piano. I take that back.
You are forcing them.
That's the one thing I said, guys. You know, and the neat thing about being up here that I appreciate is we're not racing all over the place to sports and practices and stuff like that. We ski and mountain bike and do things at our own time, and we hang out together. But I'm not forcing them to do anything that requires tons and tons of our time. But piano lessons. We just had a rehearsal for them yesterday at the teacher's house, and they won't admit it, but they really like it.
What is it about piano? Because you had mentioned that earlier in the conversation that you wished that you would have taken piano. What is it about piano being so important as a base for the musician?
That provides the background for you to communicate with every other instrument in any band you're in. You've got rhythm, melody, harmony, everything's laid out on the keyboard. You can write, and you can just communicate ideas a lot more clearly, I think, with other musicians when you have the ability to play the piano and understand the theory there. I think it's an essential, and my experience being in, the Jazz Studies School or anybody I've played with, the greatest musicians I've played with all play piano. Yeah. As well. That's everybody has the ability.
Kind of the first stop.
Yeah.
And then you might find another instrument.
Yeah. Or whatever your main instrument is, you've also got to be able to sit down at the piano and say, okay, this is how it goes with everything else. You know? So it's just kind of all right there.
Right. That's interesting. Any other instruments that your boys play?
Do
you have anybody going into the percussion?
Maybe, who knows? But my Mason, my oldest son, plays trumpet in the school band, and he will be playing piano in the jazz band at Concord in Boyne. And Eli played the xylophone at his last concert in school. I've got ballophones and all that kind of stuff. That I have a lot of weird instruments in the house that don't really translate to, the. We have an acoustic guitar, but it's like more of a showpiece.
Right.
Right. I'm sure they'll get there.
When it comes to as you said, the weird instruments that you have in your home, because when it comes to percussion, I think everybody just automatically assumes percussion is a drum kit, like that drum kit that you have in the basement that drives your parents nuts. But there are so many percussive instruments out there, and you had to be introduced to these instruments, and they all kind of have a unique way of being played, right? Yes,
I had a friend who said, I go to this West African dance class on Thursdays, and you should come play. And I was like, okay, if I say yes to everything. So okay, I'll go. So I wandered into what ended up being a fairly professional ballet troupe featuring the lead djembe player from Le Merveille de Guinea, which is the national ballet troupe of Guinea, West Africa.
Wow.
And dancers and drummers and lots of people that had studied for a lot longer than I'd been alive at that point, at some of them. And I learned really, really fast about how intense and how specific and just the depth of that music. Yeah. And I was very, very lucky to get to play in that context. It was amazing. And then from there, you know, we would do these shows, and you end up doing a piece, an Afro-Cuban folkloric piece that involves, you know, the flowy white dresses and all that sort of thing, and just learning about all these different rhythmic and percussive traditions as they relate to the cultures of the countries that they're coming from. And this was the early 2000s, and at that point everybody had kind of traveled, and I was like the young guy coming into the room. I ate it up. I loved it. It was great. It was a really wonderful experience.
Now, we have a song that we, unfortunately, we're running out of time here because I could just ask you so much more about this. But before we introduce that final song, how can people get in touch with you? I mean, I know you're actively booking yourself and your other projects. And if somebody's listening going, that sounds like something I need to feature at my establishment or whatever it might be, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I use Facebook for most of my marketing for the jazz quartet, and Botala has its own Facebook page. But yeah, they can just go on Facebook and look me up at Greg Vadnais, or I think that Botala is botalamusic@gmail. But I'm really a big proponent of communication, so if you send me a message, I will respond faster than will make you comfortable sometimes.
Well, that's really important to know.
Yeah.
And of course, we'll put this up on our Facebook page, and it'll be on crystalfrost.com as well. If you missed any portion of this conversation, you can always find us on our podcast as well, which is, again, crystalfrost.com. Let's talk about this next track here. This is on your SoundCloud page. Is this Oma mashup?
It's a mashup of Umo Sangari's song. Umo Sangari is a singer from Mali, really beautiful singer, and I saw her live in New York when I came back from Costa Rica, luckily one time. She's one of the main proponents of Malian music, and so yeah, that's her singing, and there's some Ngoni in there, and there's some really like common West African instruments that I like to implement in all the stuff I do with Botala.
Well, Greg Vadnais, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Moya la, malide nun sabwe moya.